Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, formerly National Hemophilia Foundation, Wednesday webinar. My name is Fiona Robinson, and I am the series host. In today's webinar, we will learn from a panel of lived experience experts about Untold Journeys, a glimpse into ultra-rare bleeding disorders. We would like to extend a special thank you today to CSL Behring, whose generous support made today's webinar possible. Our panel is looking forward to adding your questions to their discussion today. You can ask your question by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the webinar. We'll monitor your questions, and following the panel's initial discussion, I'll put your questions to them. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to the community beginning on Friday, November 17th. Today, we have the rare privilege of being joined by a panel of ultra-rare bleeding disorder lived experience experts: Paxton Mills, Troy Longman, and Francesca Rivera Pacheco. Their discussion will be moderated by lived experience expert Michael DeGrandpre. I'd like to thank Michael, Paxton, Troy, and Francis for joining us today. And I'll turn things over now to Michael to get us started.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael DeGrandpre, and I am privileged and excited to be here with you today to lead you through this discussion. It's going to be excellent, and I know we have some incredible folks with us, as Fiona was saying. So I live in Rhode Island. I am married to somebody who has hemophilia A, and so through my proximity to him and his work in the bleeding disorders community, I'm very fortunate and privileged to be learning and experiencing what it's like to live with a bleeding disorder firsthand. And we are very fortunate, as you can see in the first picture, to have recently welcomed a son into our family and into our home. So we have lots of exciting things happening in my life. And I'm just really excited to be chatting with this group today, as we have some really good things to talk about. So I don't want to delay that anymore. So we'll hop right in. But we'll start with Paxton, and love to hear a little bit more about Paxton, some of these great photos that we're seeing, and then we'll continue on through Paxton, Troy, and then to Francis after that. So Paxton, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Paxton Mills, and I am a student at the University of Richmond, where I'm studying biochemistry and molecular biology. For my connection to the bleeding disorders community, I have a rare platelet disorder, and I'm a member of NYLI with NBDF. So I've been really excited to be able to be a part of that group and just immerse myself in the bleeding disorders community even more through events like BDC. Some of these pictures are from BDC. You can see my involvement with some current NYLI members, as well as some of the NBDF leadership team. And yeah, just really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Troy, over to you.
Yes, my name is Troy Longman. I've been in the community for about 10 years now. I have a rare bleeding disorder called Dysfibrinogenemia. So it's a mouthful to come out, and but it's gotten me involved in this great community. So blessed for that. I have some pictures here. Most of them all bleeding disorder related. Different camps or different events which I've been to with either my local community or with National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. Except I have one. It's a shark diving photo.
Yeah.
My mom was not happy about that, especially with the bleeding disorder, but everything was okay.
I was curious the backstory on that one, Troy. That's an interesting situation that's unfolding there. But can you just quickly tell us what the story was there?
I have a friend of mine. She's really into shark conservation, and she assured me everything would be fine. And so we had a great time.
Sounds like a good friend. So I guess since you're here, we'll trust her for future adventures. But here we go. Awesome. Thank you, Troy. And over to Francis.
Hey everyone, my name is Francis Rivera Pacheco, and I have factor V deficiency, which is an ultra-rare bleeding disorder that affects the factor V. In the photos, as you can see, I am surrounded by family because my family and my friends are like my inspiration and my motivation every day. Outside of the bleeding disorders community, I do have a podcast, and it's called the Self-Growth Trait Podcast, where I combine personal stories, opinions, and research in order to better guide my listeners through their self-growth journey. and I'm also an actress slash acting instructor. And then within the hemophilia community, I am involved with 3 different chapters, the 2 in Florida and the 1 in Michigan.
Awesome. So Francis, I'm going to actually have you stay off of mute so that you can get us kicked off. We have a few questions that we prepared, and as Fiona said, we'd love for folks, if you have questions throughout the day or throughout the recording, love for you to put those into the Q&A in the chat feature in Zoom. So I'm going to go right over to Francis. Can you tell us a little bit about your diagnosis journey? Just share kind of, how old you were, and just walk us through that a little bit. And I'm going to ask some follow-up questions. And then this same question, by the way, Paxton, Troy, be heading over to you after that, after we speak with Francis, but I'll kick it over to you.
So for me, it was because when I was born, when my mom would breastfeed me, every time we were done, she would see blood in her breast, but there was no bite, there was nothing. So she was kind of confused as to where this was coming from. And it turned out that it was from the top of like my, I don't even know what to, like the roof of my mouth. And so when the doctor touched the roof of my mouth, I just started bleeding profusely. And he's like, I think she has hemophilia. So when they did the test, it actually came to be that it was factor V deficiency. Well, factor V deficiency, you get it when both parents are carriers or if there's a mutation. In my case, both of my parents were carriers and they did not know it. After they had my sister, they were pretty easy to know. It was pretty easy for them to get her diagnosis, and I'm pretty sure it was faster than mine. But for me, it took maybe, that is how we got introduced to my diagnosis.
Awesome. Can you share with us a little bit more about, as you got older, how you realized that you had a diagnosis, what that felt like for you, and kind of how you dealt with that?
I think that honestly, so I was born in the 90s, and as we all know, everything that happened with the AIDS epidemic and also within our community, the way that they spoke to my parents was, she can die at any moment. So my diagnosis was constantly in my mind 24/7. It was, you can't do sports, you can't do karate, you can't do anything that could potentially put you in danger, which a normal person would hear that and be like, you know what? Yes, I'm going to be safe. Francis did not listen to that. And Francis was like, I'm going to be a rebel and I want to dance and I want to do this. So for me, my diagnosis has always been very present. But I've also learned that just because I have my diagnosis, I'm not going to stop pursuing the things that I want to do. I'm just going to find a different approach to do them.
Awesome. Troy, I want to head over to you down in Florida and ask you a little bit about your diagnosis journey and how old you were, and similar to what Francis shared with us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So growing up, I was in Michigan, and
it
was around 12 or 13 years old, and I started having blood in my urine. And it was not a little bit of blood, it was a lot of blood. Like, it looked like straight blood was my urine. And I was embarrassed by this, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't realize it was a huge issue. So I kept it a secret. And I then one day got pulled out of gym class. I had a physical from a doctor's office to run on the track team. And then 2 days later, the doctor calls the school and says, you got to pull him out right away and bring him to the hospital. And so from there, it was about a 5-year journey of having these constant kidney bleeding issues, which caused my urine to have a lot of blood in it. I never got the diagnosis until I was around 18 years old, in which finally the specialist at the Children's Hospital in Detroit called us one random day and said, I finally have the answer, because I thought it was a lost cause on getting any answers, given it was so long without a diagnosis. The reason why the diagnosis came was because I was having those kidney issues. The doctors were so focused on the kidneys. Then I started having bleeding issues in my liver along with my eyes. and that's when they really started looking into the blood aspect of it. Thankfully, as I've aged, the bleeding has gotten better, and so that's the next mystery on our list, is why is it now getting slightly better? So
Yeah. Quick follow-up to that, to your story that you were just sharing. How you mentioned that you saw a specialist at one point. What was the process like finding? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of question marks in your orbit. Kind of give us a little overview of what it was like finding someone who you could talk to who might be able to offer you some answers.
yeah, so it took a few years to get to that point, because I would go through different kidney doctors and they would do scopes or biopsies, and then they would artificially clot my kidney, and that would hold from a matter of 2 weeks to 9 months. So there was a period of time where then I wouldn't be bleeding, and then it was okay, there's no issue here. And then it always would come back. I went through about 9 of those different surgeries. It wasn't until I was about 18 years old, which I got involved with a hematologist, and the nurse actually got me involved in the community, which I'm grateful for, because I was very hesitant. I was like, I don't think I have a bleeding disorder. They're just throwing a diagnosis out here. It's my kidneys that are the issue. And so I was hesitant at first about joining the community, but I'm so glad I did.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I've got some other follow-ups, both for you and Francis so far, but we'll go and hear Paxton. I want to hear a little bit about your journey for you to share with all of us, your story, and I'll ask some follow-ups there, and we'll keep this going. So over to you, Paxton.
Sure, yeah. So I would say that I first became obviously a bleeding disorder patient around 12, 13. I had a history of things that with the diagnosis, with hindsight, you could see they made sense with that diagnosis. Finally, things earlier in my life that had seemed kind of like one-offs, but nobody thought too much of. There was, family history, bleeding, all those kinds of things. Was always an easy bruiser. Have had a spontaneous nosebleed, those kinds of things. And went to a doctor to kind of bring all those pieces together, just saying that there are these different things going on and it seems like a lot for one person. And I think this is kind of a shared experience of a lot of the rares, is that every other possible diagnosis is thrown at you first. So just the sheer volume of different tests and different appointments and being kicked from specialist to specialist, doctor to doctor, it's exhausting, right? It's just, there were so many years there of trying to get that diagnosis. When I finally got it, of course, I was very grateful to have it and have that answer. But I think that extended period of time, especially being a kid when that's happening, you're kind of just like, I'm either completely fine or it's just, I don't know. It's out of sight, out of mind. I don't have a name for it. I don't have a label for it. But, finally got the diagnosis, and then have been able to I've been very lucky. My hematologist is an acclaimed diagnostician. And so she was able to figure me out and has worked with me since. And it ultimately got me involved in the Virginia Hemophilia Foundation community. And then from there, finally, NBDF. And I'm very grateful for that.
I wonder, you were saying that it took a few years to kind of find the right spot and kind of get an identity for what was happening. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were feeling and what kept you motivated to keep looking for something and there's a point where you could have been like, you know what, I'm going to just throw my hands up and say, this stinks and I'm just going to live with it. But you kept going. So maybe share a little bit about what kept you going, what kept you motivated.
Yeah. I think a big part of that, given the fact that I was so young, is my parents have always valued inspiring me to advocate for myself, even from a young age, and that doesn't mean, grow up too fast, but it means you're at some point going to be a 13-year-old, and then you're going to be an 18-year-old, and you're going to be a 20, right? And you're going to be a young adult, those kinds of things. But having your child develop those skills early on was very much valued by the two of them. And so that was something for me. I was like, I do know my body better than anybody else, right? I know my health. I know how I feel. I know how I'm being impacted by this. And the odds of this being, just a one-off are probably pretty slim. So it was kind of just a relentless pursuit of that answer, knowing that I felt there was something wrong. It seemed like there was something wrong. There were enough things going on that pointed to there being something wrong. It was just a matter of finding out what that was. Okay, it's not hemophilia. Okay, it's not von Willebrand's. okay, it's not this. What else could it be? And we kind of just go down the list until we get to the things that are, this is really unlikely. Maybe you're a zebra and not, so when you, I think it's a saying, my doctor said she heard in medical school of when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not for zebras, right? Because it's probably going to be a more common diagnosis. But there are zebras out there, so.
Absolutely. I think that there's another organization that has a zebra as its official animal. So that's that all comes together. You were talking about advocacy, and I'm going to go back up to Francis for a question. This is going to be for all of you. I'll make my way through. But for Francis, I'm wondering if you can share with us about a time when you didn't advocate for yourself and you knew you should have, and what you learned from that experience. And yes, Troy and Paxton, I'll be coming through to you with the same question, but I'll hand to Francis first. So a time you didn't advocate, and then what you learned from that.
When I was looking at the questions and I saw this question, I was like, I wish I had an answer. Because I've always advocated. I think that for me, my problem has been that I don't want to feel like a burden. So for example, like I'll go to the hospital and I'll like, as soon as I go to the hospital, I say, hey, I have factor V deficiency. No, it's not Leiden. I don't overclot. I underclot. Therefore, I'm pretty sure I'm having an internal bleed. Can you please see me? My problem with advocacy comes sometimes when there's a time lapse between when I get to the emergency room to when I get seen. Because my mentality is, well, there's other people here and they have other emergencies and stuff like that. So I guess that in that aspect, that would be the only thing. And in that case, that happened last year where I was in the emergency room for 10 hours before I got seen.
Wow.
So what I learned from that was, don't do that. Next time, go after the first hour or the second hour. But that was what was holding me back. It was like, well, maybe something else is going on. And literally all that had happened was that they had forgotten.
Yeah. So turning it, since you went for what you do with advocacy, what would be kind of your top 3 things you would recommend for somebody who's starting to advocate for themselves in either emergency or any situations like that?
So I always say, know your diagnosis, and the best course to like really get heard and seen by all of these professionals is like having a letter from your hematologist or from your provider explaining exactly what your diagnosis is and also what treatment to use. Because a lot of times, again, in my case, because there is another deficiency that is more common, they automatically want to categorize me as that one. And so I'm going to waste time if I have to keep talking with you for 20, 30 minutes. Like I've literally had doctors be like, give me 1 second and go on Google and show me how I am wrong. And I'm like, no, here's my letter from my hematologist telling you exactly what to do. And if you have questions, you call her. So always come prepared with the knowledge. Second thing, just because somebody else, so for example, my sister, she has factor V deficiency, we do not get affected the same way. My bleeds are usually joint bleeds and internal bleeds. With her, it's more periods and nosebleeds, right? So going in and not only knowing your diagnosis, but knowing how your bleeding disorder affects you is going to also help you advocate for yourself. Because they might tell you, oh, well, it's just a nosebleed. It's like, okay, but in the past, I've also had this and this and this happen. Like having that information and being ready to be like, no, we're going to keep treating. And the third thing is, at the end of the day, and this is like the most important one, you got to remember, like, this is your life. And for me, I always go in being nice, and I go in being nice, and I go in being assertive. But I'm going to be honest, there's times where, like, if you keep trying to let me leave the hospital and I know my life is in danger, I am going to do everything in my power to be like, no. And like, thank God I've done that. And especially like last year, they almost killed me last year. And if I hadn't done it, and if my family had also not been there with me, I don't know what would have happened. So I think that overall, when it comes to self-advocacy or just advocacy as a whole, is know your diagnosis, know how it personally affects you, and also know that you are in power.
Yep. Troy, I'm going to go back to you. Same question about maybe a time that you didn't advocate for yourself and you should have, and what you learned from it, or similar to Francis, maybe a different experience where you were in a spot when you did advocate and it worked. But any amalgamation of answer to those questions would take it, and it's all good learnings.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what Paxton mentioned. She mentioned like sometimes complacent of out of sight, out of mind. That was definitely my viewpoint, especially with the 5-year period of getting a diagnosis. I kind of given up on the finding answers and just kind of went into appointments like, your guess is as good as mine. Like, just what you want to do. And then bring it to what Francis said, which is know your diagnosis, or once you do know your diagnosis, then really, really stick to that of your body. So a time when I didn't advocate for myself was I was getting an iron infusion into my hand. And it took about an hour, but if anybody's had that, it's really cold process. It's like freezing cold on your hand. So I had like a heating pad over it and I was in the hospital. And then once that was done, they took the heating pad off and the nurse must have missed the vein because my hand was blown up nearly the size of a basketball. And so they were like, "Oh, this isn't good, but it'll go away. Like, it's no problem. It'll be gone in a few hours, so you leave now." So I ended up driving back home. It was like an hour and a half away, and went home and spent the rest of the day at home, and I was just in pain with my hand, like horribly. So we ended up having to go back to the hospital, and I had to spend 3 days there because I had like permanent nerve damage in the back of my hand. And this could have been fixed if I would have been more persistent on like, this is a serious issue. I know my body, I know this pain that's happening right now, but I was just complacent as, okay, well, you're the healthcare provider, so I'll trust your judgment on that one. So that's what I would say when I didn't advocate for myself and should have. Learning from that experience, I would definitely agree with everything Francis said. Is just know your diagnosis, and if you don't, just know your body, and push forward that way. And so that's my takeaway from that experience.
Just to follow up on that, and I think this is I think one of the things people struggle with is communicating with their healthcare provider in a situation. So obviously they went to medical school and they have all the degrees, but you're the patient, you have the lived experience. How do you, and I'll stay on Troy for this, how do you articulate that to the doctor, the provider, in an efficient and an effective way with, making sure that your point gets across? Because sometimes it can be intimidating or it can be a bit tough, especially when you're dealing with an ultra rare. What are kind of some of the things you do? And I don't know if any of you, I'm opening the bandwidth up on this, but do any of you have like a sheet of something that you bring in with you that has some facts on it, or, what are maybe some tips and tricks? But I'll go to Troy for this for now.
Yeah. So originally, if you don't have a diagnosis, then it's extremely difficult because then it's just, okay, well, you're in pain or this is happening, but we have, 100 other people in the emergency room that also say the same thing. And then with the diagnosis, once you personally know these answers, but you're with a healthcare provider that's not your own, and that is very challenging. And I do carry around a sheet like that if I know I'm going to an appointment, such as like a wisdom tooth removal, or I think of like a dental or a planned procedure. That's when you really go in prepared like that. However, sometimes when emergencies arise, it can be nearly impossible to get that point across, especially to the front desk person in an emergency room. Once you get in, then you have to convince the doctor, and that can everything that's worked for me is like, you need to call this number like right away, and that's the number to my healthcare provider at home that knows my situation, and they're a big advocate for myself as well. So,
excellent. Thank you for that. And I'm going to head over to Paxton to ask the same question about advocacy, situation where something hasn't worked and your experience from it, or something that has worked and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, for me, I think I had a many years long period there where I was good at advocating for myself in the exam room, in the doctor's office, but I was not good at advocating for myself in situations outside of the medical world, but that were impacted by my bleeding disorder. So, you know, it's the kind of thing where it's nothing looks wrong outwardly, right? You can't tell that I feel really fatigued or that I have a really bad headache or any of these things that are things that I deal with on a daily basis, right? They're not something that a professor or a teacher could look and go, you know, you might need some extra understanding or some grace or some latitude for this. So for, I would say, all of my middle school and high school years, I just put my head down, got my work done. Because I'm a really hard worker. I'm very much, you know, academically motivated. That's where my time is. It's spent, you know, in my studies, and it still is to this day. But for years there, it was just, I just dealt, and I didn't take care of myself as much as I should have, I think. And I actually just recently, I think, overcame that barrier, because I have in the past, you know, month or so been able to advocate for myself and say, you know what, I'm having this going on. I'm going to need a little bit of extra latitude or grace on this assignment, this exam, those kinds of things. Because it's something you can't, you know, I can't predict or anticipate when that's going to hit me, when I'm not going to feel good. But I've gotten better about that, and, you know, practicing what I say is a good thing to do. And I think another good example, and it's a quick one. I was also a competitive swimmer. My photo was a photo of that on my slide. And that is, you know, not generally speaking a contact sport. You're not usually, you know, it's usually thought of as pretty safe. But I took a knee to the eye one day at practice, right? And it was very painful, and got a really bad black eye from it. And it was the day before the team was supposed to get on a bus and go to Florida. And I'm from Virginia, so we were going to drive to Florida for this big meet, this big swim meet. And had to leave practice early, you know, quickly go to the eye doctor. And, you know, the eye doctor is not a trained hematologist, right? And kind of have to find that balance of, okay, is my eye okay? Is my eye actually bleeding? Is it just this area around my eye? All those things. Am I good to go to this competition in, you know, 18 hours or whatever? And having to advocate for myself in that situation, because it was another case, as a lot of rears will experience, where that person wasn't a specialist in hematology. So they looked up the bleeding disorder and was like, oh, it's mild to moderate, like you'll be fine. And it's like, it is in some people, but it's going to depend on the person, right? How it manifests itself. And also, I'm sitting here with a huge black eye, and I don't know if I'm still bleeding, right? So advocating for myself in that situation to get the answer I needed, to hopefully still do what I wanted to do, but also knowing that my health needed to come first.
Yeah, I love the expression. I always think of weight loss commercials, but I think this applies to everyone, which is individual results may vary. And weight loss commercials have it, any of those medical commercials. And I think that that's really true in these experiences, that individual results do vary across the board, but that's kind of, you know, sharing those experiences as we're doing right now, that all contributes to us being smarter, leaner, more efficient, and understanding what each other are going through in order to kind of reach results and find solutions to things. So I appreciate that. You all have touched on this in different ways, but I'd like to open it up to all three of you, maybe to be a little bit more concise with an answer. Can any of you share a little bit about how you prepare to go to a specialty doctor? Whether it's for a dental appointment or maybe an OBGYN appointment or something like that. Again, open to anyone, but how do you prepare, whether it's communication, maybe you call ahead or email ahead in a portal system, kind of what are play ahead tactics that maybe you guys employ to make sure that your visit is smooth and everyone understands exactly what's happening?
Yeah, so personally, I always, on appointments like those, I'll definitely email the provider I'm about to see, and then give them the information that I have, then set up a phone call for them to talk to my provider back at home. And so I relay the message the best I can, and then I also have my primary provider relay the same message. So I feel like it helps not only hearing the same message from the patient, but also the patient's primary physician.
Francis or Paxton?
So Love that you're asking me this question because I'm currently going through this. My OBGYN, I'm happy for her, but she's retiring. And she's
Okay.
retiring before she can do this procedure on me. So now I'm starting a whole new process of finding a new OBGYN. But the way that I'm doing it is I already know that this procedure has to be done. I made my appointment with the new OBGYN. I explained over the phone that I have my bleeding disorder, but I went on the portal to my hematologist and I explained, hey, all of this is happening. Can you tell me exactly what I have to do? And she emailed me. So when I go to my appointment, I believe it's next week, all I got to do is I bring in that email plus the letter that she has already given me. That way I have, like, again, the proof of, like, this is my diagnosis. This is everything that I have. But for this particular procedure, this is what she wants me to do. And also here's her contact information if you would have any more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Paxton, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm mostly just echoing what was already said, but I think communication is key here. I mean, it's always key, but especially in this situation, right? Because for me, I will book an appointment with my hematologist specifically to talk about whatever it is that's coming up, this other appointment, this other procedure, and have that conversation well ahead of time so that there's time for her to call in a prescription, for a medication or any of those kinds of things. And then whatever consultation beforehand with the specialist, I'm, very clear about the disorder, and try to, they haven't been exposed to it as much, educate them as best I can. And then I think just a couple other quick things that aren't necessarily in preparation for a specialist appointment, but just, I guess, smart things to do that I've learned as, being in this community is the idea of kind of having like a go bag, right? If you had a bleed, you'd have a quick central location where everything that you need is when you go to the hospital, that kind of thing. So having, the medication in stock and having it be in date, having a medical alert bracelet, right? All those kinds of things that are just become second nature to those of us who have lived it, as long as we have. Of what are things that we can do that minimize our risks and help us to operate in a smart and healthy way.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of local and maybe some of the national chapters, or excuse me, national organizations, if someone is looking for like a medical alert bracelet, for example, they may be able to offer support in ways that you can get those for reduced or no cost. And I know too, with some of the kits for getting out the door quickly, just having had a baby, I can attest that prep ahead of time is really important to get out the door quickly. But I think there's lots of different tips and tricks about getting out and having either it's those breakable go anywhere ice packs that you can do or heat packs. There's lots of different things like that that can help folks get around. These days, one of the things that's in everyone's pocket are our phones. I'm curious if any of you can share, again, kind of in the same vein, pun intended, of preparation. If any of you can talk about how you use technology to help you manage your bleeding disorder or as a communication tool with your provider or your family or your friends, or perhaps even as a support tool. Maybe, and this question again is for all of you, whomever would like to answer first. And I would love to hear from everyone, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you use your smartphones and or just technology in general as a tool in your life with your ultra rare bleeding disorder. Would ever like to go first?
Yeah, I can start off.
Sure.
To start, I would say that with an ultra rare bleeding disorder, sometimes managing your bleeding disorder could be more complicated than what seems. So even with preparation, for me personally, I have general guesses of what the right answer is, but I don't have like, okay, I need this many units of this medication for this injury. It's so complicated, and I don't have these answers. All I can do is give you the best guess, which makes advocacy so much harder because I'm guessing, the doctor knows I'm guessing. So, and then now the doctor thinks I'm a lot less credible. And so to bring it to your technology point, I have the medical, it's like the medical ID or whatever in the phone. I have like 3 different nurses contact. I have like 2 different doctors to contact. I have friends to contact that have bleeding disorders, and then I have my family as well. So, and and that's what I feel like is important, especially with ultra rare bleeding disorders, because the answer is not usually something as simple as this is the medication he needs and this is how much. It could be so much more complicated.
Yeah. Francis or Paxton?
I'll do a little NYLI plug here.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm in NYLI. I know we've got some former NYLI people on the call too. For me, I think, I mean, obviously I use the portal system to communicate with my team of providers, but I think the biggest way technology has influenced my bleeding disorder and my experience with it is connecting me through that NYLI stuff. I mean, I heard about it for the first time at the annual meeting with the Virginia Hemophilia Foundation. I think it was in 2022, like June of 2022, I heard about it. And was so excited. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I want to apply. So, I mean, it obviously connected us all and got it, made this available to everybody. And it has taken us across the country for different events and meeting everybody in person. And since then, I mean, BDC in particular, this last one was just incredible for me, right? And getting to meet these people who I had not a whole lot of exposure to before. But since then, a couple of us have just stayed in constant contact since then, have become really close friends, and they were on my slide as well. So I think it's done a really nice job of connecting me with other young people with bleeding disorders. And that's just, I don't know, I guess that's something I didn't know I was lacking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I knew I didn't know a lot of people with bleeding disorders, but that was something that mattered to me, getting to have these conversations after BDC sessions in person, where we just talk for hours, right, about our experiences. Like, that was just really validating. And then having actual friendships come out of that have been able to persist in the months that have followed, and I hope will persist further past that as well, all aided by our ability to connect with technology.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, I know in a little bit, we're going to just share a slide talking about BDC for next year in 2024, which is obviously such a great place to socialize. I mean, the whole point of the conference really is to bring people together from all parts of the bleeding disorders community. And so I think you bring up a really nice point about making connections, and those late night chats, man, those are some of the best chats I've ever had, are the ones that go in late into the night where you're talking about all sorts of things with no compass. It's just kind of like meandering through the woods and seeing what comes out of it. So I love that. Francis, I wonder if you have any tech thoughts for this question.
I'm gonna piggyback off Paxton and Troy. I use my phone as a medical ID. I also have used my phone as a resource to keep in contact with people. But I will also say my favorite app to use is Snapchat, because it's on the camps that I was part of, and also just helping with the foundation over here. We would create groups, and so it has turned into our own little Google search of we'll take a photo of something that is going on, and we're like, has anybody else experienced this? And what has been your thing? So it's interesting because yes, sure, I can go on Google, but I feel like there's that added sense of community of speaking to people that but they're all in a group. So you don't feel I don't know, you don't feel oh my gosh, here comes Frances again with her question. It's no, it's up for everyone to answer. And because all of us on the group chat are in Florida, we'll talk about doctors, hospitals, insurance. We'll talk about anything and everything related to medical stuff, because we're looking out for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's nice about sharing. I think that's really a really sweet spot about kind of getting each other's experiences and comparing notes. I'm wondering if you guys can share a little bit about, you've all kind of touched on this in different ways, but share with me a little in the audience, a little bit about how your ultra rare bleeding disorder has shaped your identity as you're coming of age. I mean, I'd like to lump myself in. We're all younger people. And so as you guys are coming and kind of developing, I mean, this is a big part of your life, and it has really seemed to have shaped a lot. Wondering if any of you can share a little bit about how you found identity through your ultra rare bleeding disorder. Maybe Paxton, I see your head's going, maybe with excitement. So I'll toss to you first.
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, I mean, I found some personal connection out of it that's been really nice. And I think that it's really cool to have that balance between engagement on the national level with NBDF, but then getting to be completely immersed in the really intimate local level that is the Virginia Hemophilia Foundation, right? So I think that's been great for me, and I'm really happy that I've now kind of jumped into that full swing and really involved. But I think a better example to answer this question for me personally is where I see myself going in terms of a career. So I mentioned I'm a dual major in biochemistry, molecular biology, and I've always been a kid who wanted to do something with science, right? And I didn't know, is that going to be something that's medical? Is that going to be research? Now I'm pretty confident it's both. I really like the idea of both of those things together, especially the research aspect. But I think I can pretty confidently credit my, hours in waiting rooms and in exam rooms and waiting for results from the NIH and working with incredible researchers and doing all these tests and looking at conditions that aren't very well understood. I've slowly but surely kind of come to the realization that I think what I want to do is something in hematology, and specifically something in research, and kind of combining that love of science with what has been a very personal experience for me over the past several years. So I think that's where I see myself going. I hope that it works out, being able to kind of couple the clinical side of things with the research side of things to hopefully make rare conditions better understood and have more research devoted to them in particular.
Amazing. Sounds like you have a hurricane force of trajectory moving you in the right direction toward greatness there. So I love that. Francis, I saw you nodding or looking like you might have something to add to that.
Absolutely. I don't know. I
Go
think
for
like
it.
a lot of people, when they hear like I have a ultra rare bleeding disorder, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like I feel so sorry for you." And I'm like, "Why? Why?" Like I know it depends on the person, but like for me, I feel very blessed in many ways. Primarily because like my sister and I, we both have it. So it's like I had someone be there with me, right? And that's also part of my identity. I'm very family oriented or friends oriented, whatever you want to call it. I'm an extrovert. So by having this diagnosis and these set limitations that people kept trying to put on me, it kind of forced me to get out of my comfort zone, which also made me realize, oh no, I like being on the spotlight because I love it. Which also was like, okay, well then I want to be an actress. Okay, I want to do this. But now with this identity being shaped by my diagnosis within the community, my whole thing or like my whole desire is like, I want to help people know like whatever you want to do, you can do. Again, you just have to reshape how you do it. And for me, I wouldn't have that mentality. I can like guarantee you, like I would not have that mentality if I didn't have my diagnosis. Now, does it always make it easy? No, absolutely not. But it definitely has taught me a lot of skills and it's given me a lot of motivation and passion to like be in the room. And that's my other thing. Like this year for me, like doing this, for example, I would have loved to have done this years ago, but the reality is I wasn't prepared. And then this year, the opportunity came and I felt confident enough. And I was like, yes, I want to be involved. I want to be in the room where it happens. I know Hamilton, nod. I want to be in the room there. And I want to be a part of the change. And I also want to, the same way that Paxton was talking about it, it's like, I'm not medically trained, nor do I want to be medically trained. But you know what? I want to be in the room where the medical individuals are, where we can say, hey, as a patient, this is what we need. And a lot of times what we need, it's like we understand that when it comes to medicine, it takes time, but sometimes we just want somebody to listen to us and just take us seriously. So it's like, actually what I need is more customer service. Actually, what I need is more empathy. But I'm not able to do that on a small platform to the impact that I want to do, which is why I continuously push myself to be everywhere and anywhere all at once, like a movie.
Yeah, I love that. Troy, I don't know if I'm gonna go to you, and then really quickly before I have you answer, just want to give a shout out that we still have a little bit of time for some Q&A after this. I know Fiona is collecting any questions that come in. But Troy, I'll have you finish, and then I have one more kind of wrap question for everyone. But Troy, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this.
Yeah, my bleeding disorder has definitely shaped who I am. When I first started bleeding, I was very embarrassed of my health condition. I was a young boy, and like I said, I grew up in Michigan, and any young teenage boy will pee in the snow. And I could not do that when I was a kid because it would look like a murder scene. And I was so embarrassed about it. And it was like if I was with friends playing outside in the snow and they were all doing it, was like, no, I can't do that. Like, and I would just like keep that to myself. It was the same, just going to the bathroom in like the locker room in middle school. Like I could not use a urinal. It would paint the urinal red. Like it was something I was very self-conscious of. And that brought through into my early adult life as well, because I was very keen on, I'm going to keep my bleeding disorder alive, much so separated from my non-bleeding disorder life. Yep. And I tried to really separate that in the fact that, okay, my bleeding disorder is not me at all. And I've lived two different personas. Now I accept my bleeding disorder. I actually find it find the blessings in it because of the community members that I can, and the things I've been able to do, and the people I've been able to connect with. Like Francis said, is that it can be a blessing. And now that I've realized it, I feel more whole as a person.
Yeah, I love that. And I know for myself personally, my husband and I have found incredible blessings through this community, which is really funny. That's something that can initially be so challenging to make it through. All of the wonderful things that can come out of it, relationships, information, sharing, etc. So that's amazing. Thank you for that. Thank you all for those. I'd like to just do kind of go around the circle and maybe start with Francis. Like we did in the beginning, I'll do Francis, Troy, and then Paxton for the punctuation mark at the end. Ask just any final thoughts about your experience with an ultra-rare bleeding disorder. And then after that, we're going to hop back to Fiona for any questions that have come in. And then we've got a few other things to wrap with. But over to you, Francis, for some final thoughts.
My final thoughts are that what I've already said of don't let your diagnosis determine like how you live your life or what you're able to accomplish. If anything, let it inspire you to push yourself forward. And that's it.
Amazing. Thank you. Troy, anything for you to say? And you can talk, if you'd like to add more, you're welcome to, or be short, whichever. But over to you.
Yeah, my final thoughts would be to get involved. You're all listening to this webinar, and either your state or the national chapter would love to have you more involved. So even if you're just a friend of somebody who has a bleeding disorder, that is what matters. And we would love to have more people in the community. And that's one thing that I've definitely gotten out of the community is just the involvement level, and that's what I'm really grateful for.
I love that. There's nothing better than having more voices to add to the choir to make our collective voice stronger. So I love that. Those are both good things. Paxton, for you, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would say, and this is kind of something I said it a lot to myself as I was getting that diagnosis, is, rare is only rare until it happens to you, and then your odds are 100%, right? So not shying away from that diagnosis and accepting it for what it is, embracing, like we've said, the good things that could come out of it, while still acknowledging the challenges and doing the best that you can do for yourself to navigate through whatever's on your plate at any given moment, and doing so successfully and healthily. And then also there's just, there's power in numbers, right? So even if you don't have the exact same rare bleeding disorder as I do, we have this shared niche experience of having a rare one, right? So there's an opportunity for connection there. And we've said that a bunch of times, but really taking that and running with it. I mean, I met someone at BDC who had my exact bleeding disorder for the first time ever. So that was really exciting. Wow. So there's just, there's a lot of opportunity to connect if you just put yourself out there.
That's incredible and sounds very exciting. Actually, I can't personally imagine that because it's just that's so wild to think that you've gone all your life without having met somebody, and then all of a sudden you do. That's kind of bonkers. But sounds exciting. And I actually lied earlier. I have one more question for you guys, and this can be a lightning round. But I'm curious if you all, and maybe I'll go to Paxton first. I'll go backward. Paxton, Troy, Francis. Can you just quickly explain what was the first thing that the way that you got involved in the bleeding disorders community, however it was, what was your first interaction? How did you get to your first interaction with an organized group or person in the bleeding disorders community? Was it Facebook? Did you go to a meeting, etc.? How did that happen? And I'll go to Paxton first.
I'm ready. Okay. So
Right.
I volunteered for a lot of medical charity related walks and runs and events as a high schooler. And the Virginia Hemophilia Foundation had their Unite walk. And I was like, well, that's really nice because I also have a bleeding disorder, right? And I realized it was the Virginia Hemophilia Foundation for all bleeding disorders and felt very welcome. And, had some involvement with that chapter throughout my years of high school. And then, they were the ones who introduced me to NYLI, which has sparked my national engagement. And I'm not looking back. I'm going to stay here. I love it so much. So.
Fabulous. I think everyone loves having you in the driver's seat there. Troy, over to you.
Yeah, so my nurse convinced me to go on an 18 to 24-year-old adventure camp in California that were for people with bleeding disorders. And that was my first taste of the bleeding disorder community, I guess. And then I met friends there, and they convinced me to become a staff member at the children's camp in the state of Michigan. And then one thing led to another. I got involved with NYLI, and then it's been a rolling stone of anytime I do some sort of bleeding disorder event, it then leads to another one, or I meet somebody new who has a different event that they're interested in. And so it's definitely now a rolling stone of opportunities and just involvement.
Amazing. I love that. Sounds like a really nice dive off the deep end into a great experience that really got you in there. So that's amazing. Francis.
I'll tell my favorite story. When I went to camp for the first time ever, because originally I'm from Puerto Rico and I didn't really speak English. And then all of a sudden the nurse over here was like, hey, there's this camp. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I went to the camp, and the nurse at the camp, she's like, what do you have? And I'm like, I have factor V deficiency. I've never met anyone like me. Like, I'm just telling her all of this. And she's like, okay. And then come like eating time, I think it was like the spaghetti night. And she's like, oh my gosh, Francis, like you will never believe. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I found someone. She has the same bleeding disorder as you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. She's like, yeah, like just turn around. I'm going to bring her over. And I'm like, okay. So I turn around, and then she's like, she's right here. It was my sister. I had forgotten that she went to the same camp. But this woman was so excited. She was like, Francis, I found someone for you. And I'm like, this is my sister. I've always known her. I should have said outside of my family.
An important side distinction. Well, thank you. Thank all three of you. We are going to do Q&A in just a sec. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to drop into the chat. In the meantime, while you're doing that, I did want to draw everyone's attention to a few key resources that NBDF has put together for ultra rare educational resources, as it says across the top. They have a collection of educational materials, factor deficiency booklets, ultra rare deficiency webinars, and of course, coming up on December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern is the Ultra Rare Wednesday webinar, which is going to be actually hosted or moderated by Francis with some professional healthcare professionals. So we're really excited about having that, another opportunity to get everyone together and to chat more about this. I think resources are the key. I mean, collectively, there's so many great things out there, and NBDF is putting together a lot of them, organizing them into great ways that you can absorb that material. And I'm excited to have this slide up, which is the wonderful in-person opportunity that's presented annually by NBDF, which is their Bleeding Disorders Conference, or BDC as it's known more locally. I know I have a great picture up there with a few folks, including Nicole Scappi from NBDF, who's up there. But we've got lots of great opportunities coming up. This is NBDF's annual meeting. Will be in Atlanta, Georgia next year, 2024, September 12th through the 14th. And I know registration for that, I believe, opens up early next year. So keep your eyes out in your email inbox for that. Emails coming in from NBDF. They'll have more about that coming up. I'm going to toss or invite Fiona back in to see if there are any questions that have come in. Fiona, over to you.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you to Michael, to Paxton, Troy, Francis for that really engaging discussion. There's just so much for us to learn from your experiences and expertise. And I think your stories really illustrate that term lived experience expert. Because I found you all mentioned situations where you had to be more expert in your disorder than some of the healthcare professionals that you were interacting with. So I really appreciate that illustration. Michael mentioned the really fantastic collection of NBDF resources for and about people with ultra-rare bleeding disorders. I just want to call our audience's attention to the chat window of Zoom, where we've dropped the link to access those resources. So you can copy that, bookmark it in your browser, share it with your friends and family. And I know Nicole and the NBDF team are always working on new resources. So check back often and see what you can find there. Michael has done such a terrific job with bringing really interesting questions to you and leading this discussion that, I don't even think I need to add anything to that. I think we're just going to thank you all for your fantastic contributions here. And maybe to wrap up our Q&A session, we would like to ask our audience some questions. We've got a little poll that we'd like to run. So you should see now on your screen 3 anonymous polling questions. And we would really appreciate it if everybody in our audience could take a moment and fill those questions out for us. They are anonymous, so just go ahead and give us your thoughts, your feedbacks on this. And as we give everyone a few minutes to answer the polling questions, I want to thank Michael DeGrandpre, Paxton Mills, Rivera, Pacheco, and Troy Longman for sharing so generously of your expertise and your time with us this afternoon. I'd like to thank each and every one of you in our audience for joining us today. I know this was really a rare treat for us to hear from this group. This recorded webinar will be available on Friday, November 17th at hemophilia.org under the Events tab. If you select past events, you will find all of our archived webinars there. Also available in the Events tab is the schedule of upcoming webinars in this series. Wednesday webinars will take a break next week, but please join us in 2 weeks on November 29th for an in-depth look at iron deficiency and anemia, an underappreciated complication in von Willebrand disease. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you all again in 2 weeks.
Amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you.